Hi, I'm going to show you how to do a levitation or ghost type photograph using Photoshop. I'm going to talk a little bit about the technique that I use to take the photograph and then guide you through the steps to process the image. Now, this is by far not a new technique at all. It's not too difficult to do, but recently for my photo club in the pub creative photography course, we had an assignment of supernatural, so it seemed to fit the bill quite nicely for that. So I thought I'd give it a go and give you a tutorial as well, so you can try it as well. So shooting technique, reasonably simple. All you need to do is to think of the idea, the concept of the image, and then you need to use a tripod. So when you take the photograph, you can see the picture I'm looking at now in Lightroom. So camera on tripod, all set up, manual focus in the right place, and take the first shot. Then the idea is in the second shot, you have exactly the same photograph, but in the second frame what I've done is there's me straining to hold my daughter. So the idea is that I'm going to hold her in this picture and then overlay that with the other picture and delete myself from that. Which is reasonably easy to do. Now, the less overlap you have, the better. Obviously, in this one, I've got to cut myself out from around the sort of top of her, front of her dress there, around there, and obviously I've got to get rid of my legs and things underneath as well. So the idea, it looks like she's floating. Okay, so that's the two images. I've processed them in exactly the same way. So that's one and that's another. And then I've exported both of those images as high resolution 16-bit PSD files, and then going to open those PSD files in Photoshop and do the Photoshop work to make that happen. I didn't apply any sharpening when I output the files, and I output them, I said high resolution, I actually output them at 18 inches on the long edge at 300 pixels per inch. And I'm actually going to apply the sharpening later on in Photoshop. It's always best to do the sharpening at the last stage of processing, so it makes sense not to do it in Lightroom but to do it in Photoshop. Okay, let's just switch now through to Photoshop. I'm using an old version of Photoshop on this. It's actually CS1, but it's plenty good enough to do what we need to do here. And equally, you should be able to do it in Photoshop Elements as well, although some of the things may be in slightly different places, but the theory is exactly the same. Okay, so let's go File, Open, and then choose my files. And I've got this one here. Which one is it? Make sure I get the right ones. And there's these two here. Open those two files. And here we go. So that's one image, and that's the other image. Now, when photographing these, as I mentioned, you put the camera on a tripod, and you have to be very, very careful you don't move the camera at all, because if the backgrounds don't match up, it's not going to work. I set mine on a tripod and I used a cable release so as not to jog the camera. So if you've got a cable release, that's all the better, or a remote control, so you don't touch the camera. Okay, so what I'm going to do is literally Control A to select all, Control C to copy, go to the other picture, Control V to paste. So that's that picture in exactly the same place with any luck. It's going to turn that layer on and off, and you can see, okay, the only thing you can see different in the background is actually just the leaves down here in the path I used to walk into in the frame. So the leaves have moved in a slightly different way, you can just see there, but everything else should be pretty much in the same place. Now there is a slight discrepancy in exposure. The top image is a little bit darker. I'm just going to brighten it up very slightly. I'm just going to use the curves option, just move midtones up a little bit like that. I think that should be enough. That looks much better, matches the background much better now. Okay, so now what I've got to do is I'm going to use a mask, and I'm going to mask myself out of the shot and just leave my daughter visible from this layer. So first thing to do, go to Layer, Add Layer Mask, and what I'm going to do is reveal all. Now you can see on the upper layer in the Layers palette here, If the layers palette isn't open, then make sure that you open that from the Windows menu. And you can see that layer mask is currently white. That means that nothing is masked. And if I use black to paint on the picture, or actually painting on the mask and not the picture, I'm going to choose a bigger brush size just to show you what happens. So there you can see I'm painting on the mask with black, and you can see masking myself out of the image. So straight away you get the idea what we're going to do here. But with this image we're going to have to be quite precise so it looks authentic. I'm just going to step backward now just to go back to where we were. Okay, so we realised to paint me out of the picture we've got to paint on the mask in black. That's easy enough. So, and we can do that in many different ways. And actually, you know what, I didn't do this picture perfectly. I manual focused, and I thought I manual focused in the right place, but actually it's very slightly out of focus. So it's incredibly important to get the setup right, but this is perfectly adequate to demonstrate what we're going to do here. Actually, what I'm going to do, I need to cut round virtually right the way round her, so I'm going to use a path to do so. So I'm going to go into Paths, and again, if you haven't got the Paths palette open, then do so from the Window menu. Create New Path. I'm going to call this Cutout. That's essentially what we're doing here. I've got the pen tool selected here, and then I'm going to go very close in so I can see all of the detail. Now, if you've not used the pen tool before, it does take a little bit of getting used to. It's something that I've used a lot because I used to be a graphic designer. So I used to have to do cutouts a fair bit, but it also very relevant for photographers for this kind of thing. Every time you click, if you hold, you get this little angle, so you can angle the line to your needs. And what I'm going to do is every time I do this, I'm just going to do it just slightly on the inside, because I don't want to end up with a hard edge or a black edge to the photograph. So I'm coming just inside very, very slightly. And I only need to be precise on this where I need to mask myself out of the image. So as soon as I get down here a bit further, show you what I mean, just get here, down here, around here, and curve it around here, down to here, around here, and then down here. Okay, here now where I'm not in the picture, I can be much less precise. So I'm just going to roughly cut round the image. I said doesn't need to be precise, but let's go around here. Here. Okay, now when I'm in the image again, this is when I need to get back to it and start doing it more precisely around the dress, etc. So I'm just going to come round to her thumb here, back round to her dress, up to her hand here, around here, up here. Ooh. Now this is tricky because I've got two paths that appear to be quite close to each other. So it's a bit tricky to do. You can always go in closer if you want to. Just trying to carefully cut round her hands here, back up to the dress. Sometimes when you're doing a cutout, you need to cheat a little bit. I guess it's like drawing a picture sometimes. You kind of need to know which details to leave out. And we'll see how that goes in a minute, because we're coming up to a hair, which as a cutout is always going to be a tricky thing to do. So see here, a strand of hair coming down here, I'm going to miss that and just do the bigger strand. And being careful, because actually I've actually got her scarf round my camera bag, and you can just see some of that scarf coming through, and obviously I don't want that in the picture, so be careful not to include that too much. So to be fair, I'm probably making this look a bit easier than it is. I'm not bigging myself up, but I've done this sort of thing for many years in design. It does take a little bit of getting used to. It can be a bit fiddly to get used to. But that's all it is really. It's nothing too clever. It's just literally getting used to the knack of being able to draw around these strands of hair. Going around here. Okay. Sorry, I know this is a bit boring for you watching, but at least you get the idea of how it works. Back up here. I'm going to cheat slightly here. Okay, now I'm past my leg here, so I can now come outside. I don't have to be as precise until I get up here. And there's actually, this is a bit of careless photography when I actually took the shot. You can see the catch of my bag, my camera bag, just by her head, which obviously I want to eliminate. So I'm just going to cut around there. And also you can see by her mouth is my bag as well. Again, naughty me for getting that in the shot, but it's okay. I can cut it out, but of course it makes my life more difficult. And as I said, the more that overlaps with your subject, the more difficult it's going to be. I suppose in an ideal world, you know, if she was supported on something like a stool or something like that, then you wouldn't have any cutting out to do above. Now this is a bow on her dress. Now I don't know whether this is going to look unusual because it's sticking out like this. If it does, we can always cut it off. It's not a problem. Okay, so that's the basic outline. There are some other things that we need to do as well. Now you can see where my hand is, where I'm holding her. I'm going to need to cut that out as well because that's not right. Now if I wasn't holding her, you'd probably see more of her dress here. Now what's going to happen here though, when we cut this out, is we're going to see right through to the other side. It may not look authentic, so we need to be careful with that. But we can always go back and have another look. I think that should be okay. Just have a look around the image. Yeah, that looks to be fine. So now we have this, this path. And now to make a selection, which is what we want to do, we want to make a selection and then fill the mask part of that layer with black. So first of all, I'm going to go to the Paths palette. I've got the path selected, I've clicked on it. I'm going to go to this little triangle here on the palette and say make selection. Now I've got the option to feather the radius of this selection, and that's what I want to do with this. If I don't feather it, it's going to be too hard and it's going to look like a cutout. We want it to be softer so it's more natural. I think that 1 pixel will probably be okay for this. Click OK, and you can see it's now turned into a selection. I'm going to go back to the layers palette. Now, if I fill this with black, it's going to mask her out of the image. So actually what I need to do is go to the select menu and then go inverse, and that's inversed that selection. If I zoom back out, hopefully you can see what I mean. So you can see that the selection is now selecting everything but her. Now hopefully this is where the magic will happen. I'm going to click on the background layer, which is what I want, and I'm going to go edit, fill, and I'm going to fill with 100% black. So that's not filled the picture with black, but it's filled the mask with black, but still revealing her. So if I now use the Command D to deselect, you can basically see what's happened there. So I have the basic image of Mila, my daughter, floating in the image. And it's pretty good. If we wanted to, we could go in and make sure that the edges are soft enough. And I think they all look pretty good. The only problem is that I didn't get the picture perfectly in focus when I did it, which is a bit of practice, because remember, the best thing to do really here is to get your subject in the frame where you want them to appear, auto-focus on them, and then switch to manual focus, because remember, you're going to be taking a frame without anyone in the picture and you need it to be focused in the right place. So I got the focus a little bit wrong, but I think that's okay as a shot. Now, one other thing that I want to do is, okay, it was actually quite an overcast day and quite flat lighting, so there's no shadows being cast here. But I'm actually going to cheat slightly. I'm actually going to create a shadow as if Mila, my daughter, was creating a shadow on the ground. And this will make it look more authentic, I think. I'm going to go back to Paths and find this layer that I used to make the mask. Make selection, 1 pixel. I'm then actually going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this shadow. And then I'm going to go to the select menu. I'm going to feather that selection by quite a bit. I'm going to choose 25 pixels. So that's going to be quite soft now. Edit, fill. Now this time I'm filling black in the layer. I'm not actually putting it in a mask or anything. So here we go. This is going to be the shadow. Now I can use the pointer tool with this layer selected. Now just watch out that this little option up here, auto select layer, because that, when you click on a layer, it selects the one that you touch. I'm going to turn it off for this. I find it a little bit irritating, but I have the right layer selected. I'm now going to just drag it down here, and what I'm going to do is transform it. So Control T is the shortcut to transform, and I'm just going to manipulate that shadow a bit so it kind of looks authentic, and then hit return when I'm done. I think I probably want to blur that shadow a bit more, so I'm going to go into the filter menu, Gaussian blur, add a bit more blur to it. Okay, still not in the right place, I don't think. I think it needs to be kind of more like there. Then this is the key thing, it's the opacity slider on that layer. That's 0, and we want to just make that area of ground just underneath her a bit darker. So it's something around that sort of nature, I think. And then that kind of looks like the shadow, like she's being levitated above it. That's the very basic image. What I tend to do when I get to this stage is then save it. I'm going to save it as a layered PSD file, and I'm going to call this one Levitation. And just save that, preserving the layers so that if I want to I can always go back and edit it. Just take a second to do that. I think this image will work best in black and white. Now I could have exported my images as black and white if I wanted to, but it so happens that I've done it in colour, so I'm going to do this black and white conversion in Photoshop. You can do this several different ways in Photoshop, and we'll look at the way I'm going to do it in a second, but basically as long as I end up with the right result, it doesn't really matter which way I do it. That's just taking its time to save. It's quite a high res layered file, and then when that's done I'm going to flatten this image, so it's just going to be one layer, and then apply the black and white effect, which I think will probably add to the look and feel of the image, be a bit more spooky, hopefully. Hopefully sometime today that will finish saving. There we go, I think we're very nearly there. The Apple Macintosh spinning beach ball of death, which Mac users might be familiar with. Hopefully we're nearly there. Obviously when you're working with high-res 16-bit images, it takes up a bit of processing power on your computer, so sometimes these things can take a little while to do. Today my computer's having a bit of a go slow. So. Right, okay, that's done. I'm now going to click on the layers palette in the little triangle and click on flatten image. So you'll now see these 3 layers here. In a moment they're going to merge into one, so we've just got one flat photograph. Done. I'm now going to go and create my black and white conversion. I think I'm probably going to do that through gradient map actually, just by clicking there and click OK. Actually that's kind of nearly there. I'm just going to use probably the curves now just to give it a bit more contrast. I don't want to go too dark with that black, but what I do want to do is just punch up the whites a little bit. If I do that, it's going to bring her dress up a bit and really kind of accentuate her a bit more. A little bit easing off of the shadows there. That is about it. So that is your levitation image, and the principles of applying that to other kind of ideas along the same line is exactly the same. You make life much easier for yourself if you can have less lines cutting into your subject that you've got to remove. So like I said, if I did this image with my daughter kind of leaning over a stool or something, then it would only be the stool underneath that I would have to remove, not anything else. But there you have it. I hope that's useful to you. Thanks very much.